And my response, I got quite angry. And I said, damn it, stop for a second and think about what I've been through. The loss, the loneliness, the pain. I sputtered, but eventually I realized she was right. The obstacle was the way.
So, guys, I want to introduce you to one of my very favorite people on the planet. You might actually already know him. He's pretty well known online. You might know him as Papa Bear. You might know him as his handle Muscle Friendly and the beautiful photography he does. You might know him as Dr. Clifford if you've perhaps been in class with him. You might know him as Andy. But Papa Bear is somebody who I have had the deep privilege of knowing very well for a few years now. He is pretty well known in the gay world and is beloved by many. And I thought it would be wonderful for us to get to have a conversation, to have him share a little bit about his story, his search for his ecstatic self, his journey through really difficult situations, and to provide a really beautiful example of how the pursuit of wholeness, the pursuit of our most luminous self, our inner sun, is ever ongoing, and how sometimes the obstacles become the way. Papa Bear, Andy Clifford, it is such a joy to have you here. Welcome, my dear friend.
Well, thank you, Kaylin. As people will, I think, probably come to understand in our conversation, you have been absolutely a pivotal person in my journey, in my recovery from some of the things that I was dealing with. And so I'm very pleased to be here and to be with you.
It is an honor and a privilege to walk beside you, my dear man. Andy, I introduced a little bit, but maybe you want to give a little more context. People know you from very different worlds. Like I alluded to, you are a graduate professor. You are a wonderful kind of gay celebrity in the circuit party scene. You're a photographer. You're seen around town with some of the biggest musclehead guys. Who are you?
I'm all those things. I usually, like on social media, will say something along the lines of I'm gay, kinky, polyamorous, and also a widower, a grieving father, and somebody who is surviving PTSD. So I am all of those things.
One of the things I love about you is the totality of the experience of life that you encompass and don't shy away from. That you are somebody who embraces grief, embraces joy, embraces heartbreak, embraces ecstasy, and really embodies the totality of the search for self.
Embrace sounds like such a funny word you use there, to embrace grief. I'll tell you, my journey began, at least it took a huge leap forward, after my partner died. He died very suddenly and very unexpectedly in my arms. And that was the thing that really gave me this huge push forward into what at the time I didn't know. But to answer your question, about 2 months after he passed, I found myself visiting his parents in the Florida Panhandle and walking along the beach. And at that point, just being in a strange place because I was racked with emotional pain. And yet at the same time, on this gorgeous beach, the water was lapping at my toes, the sun was shining, and it was a glorious place to be. And I heard very clearly a voice in my mind say that joy is the flip side of sorrow, and that it was possible in the same way that in BDSM, we can float back and forth across the line between pleasure and pain and they become blurred. Too, is there a similar relationship between sorrow and joy? And on that day, I think that was the first time I had begun to understand.
I know that's something we've had many conversations about, the pairing of sorrow and joy. I often reference the beautiful Khalil Gibran quote that he wrote a poem about the balance of joy and sorrow. He says something along the lines of, is not the riverbed that your joy now flows through once carved by sorrow, is not the flute that soothes your soul once whittled by knives. When sorrow is eating at your table, joy is sleeping at your bed. The two are inseparable.
And thank you, first of all, for sharing that with me. And once I found that, it gave me a little bit of courage and perspective. In my own story, I would say that right after Daddy Bear, my partner, died, getting up in the morning just became this really treacherous thing. And for the first couple of years, life just seemed so painful, requires so much strength just to do ordinary things. It felt awful all the time. And yet I didn't want to give up. I knew I wanted to find a way forward. And I found that if I could just focus on something that was really beautiful, and it could be something like that walk on the beach, or the fact that I still had people around me who were reaching out to me wanting to know how I was, that I could just focus on that little piece of joy. I found that my world seemed like it was washed over, colored over in a wash of black, but these little bits of joy were almost like a pin penetrating through the darkness and letting some light pop through. And if I just focused on that little pinprick of light coming through, the darkness didn't seem so bad. And that was another sort of first step that I took to try and come back from what I'd experienced.
Getting to hear your story and interact with it, we know that grieving and healing and incorporating the challenges we faced, working with them, is not a linear process. It's not a one-dimensional process. It's not about trying to remove yourself from the pain. It's not about trying to deny its existence. It's multi-layered and very faceted. And one of the big breakthrough moments I remember in our conversations that we've had in our work together is a moment where you have this really big revelation around accepting discomfort and allowing it to be present. Do you want to talk about your journey with that a little bit?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a thick head, I think. By the time I came to you, Kaylin, I had worked already with a number of therapists and even several other life coaches. And I think at least three other people introduced this concept of sitting with a feeling. And there was something about the way they described it that made no sense to me. And I wasn't quite getting it. And it wasn't until we started working together and you explained it the way that you do that it made sense to me. And there was a point, I think it probably was a year ago around this time, where it suddenly made sense. And I found that I was able to do it instead of pushing against and saying, no, I don't want this. Or when I feel sad, I'm going to think happy thoughts, because that too was a form of resistance, although I didn't understand it at the time. Instead, if I could just sit with a feeling and let it be, not to, and this is where I had trouble, not to wallow in it and say, oh, poor me, and not also to relive the moment. For example, not to go back and say, oh, I remember when this happened, I remember that happened, and I called the ambulance and so on and so forth. To not do any of that, but instead just sit with the physical sensation, the emotional sensation, if I can call it that, to not push against it, but also to step away from it and observe it dispassionately, to say, I'm not in the washing machine going around and around with the clothes, I'm outside watching the rinse cycle set in. And honestly, I think it was a combination of your explanation of the work with you, but also some of the other therapies that I'd done that had taken the anxiety and the fear and the pain and brought them down to more manageable levels too. And when that happened, I was suddenly in a sweet spot where that approach of sitting with, giving space for the pain, the negative emotion suddenly began to work for me.
It's a difficult thing that you can't really understand until you've experienced it. This idea of neither pushing nor pulling, allowing yourself to feel something but not being dragged under by it. We talk about these things through metaphors because it's so hard to describe. Some people will say it's like surfing, allowing yourself to feel the waves but riding the wave rather than being pulled under by it. But even that sort of description really doesn't do justice to what that experience is like. I often talk about moving into the role of the observer of your thoughts, the observer of the experience, that you are still experiencing your humanity, but it's almost like you're aware that you're watching it unfold rather than fully invested in it. Like you're aware that you're watching a movie rather than thinking the movie is actually happening. And still allowing yourself to go through the feelings, but just having that one step of removal.
And that observer status is the important piece. At one point, you said to me, get curious and figure out why. And I found that was a really helpful thing too, because if I was having a moment where anxiety and grief was washing over me and also that sort of thing, and if I could sit back from it and go, isn't that interesting? While I'm having this sort of emotional flood, I'm now thinking about this and this. And rather than engaging in that thought and going, oh, suddenly I'm thinking about a horrible moment from my childhood and isn't that terrible? I'm reliving, to step outside of it and say, isn't that interesting that this feeling led to this thought? And I wonder what that connection is all about. What can I learn from this? What is this feeling? What is that thought here to tell me today?
I love that. I really do think that curiosity about life is one of the greatest skills we can develop. Curiosity about ourselves, curiosity about why things are the way they are.
In 2021, my partner, Daddy Bear, and I had a number of boys and pups around us. And the one that I was closest to, I sometimes refer as my son. And in September of 21, he took his own life. And it was interesting to me that last year, when we were approaching the anniversary of his death, I had noted that it was coming up on the calendar, but I was very busy and got lost in things. And there was a day when I was at the gym, packing up, ready to go home, and I suddenly felt this wave of anguish come over me. And I, right there in the change room, had to cry. There was just no holding it back. And I remember thinking, okay, sit with this, use that technique. What is this all about? And I thought, okay, feeling, I'm getting curious about you. What are you here to tell me? And I heard a voice say, don't forget him. And it was then that I looked at my phone and said, damn it, what day is it? And it was the anniversary of his passing. I had forgotten the day. On a conscious level, forgotten it. On a subconscious level, was clearly aware of what it was.
I think many of us have experienced really challenging situations. There is often a feeling of totality around it, like it becomes all-encompassing, and it can sometimes feel eternal. Will I ever move beyond this? I had a conversation with my husband earlier today about that experience with some really intense traumas in my earlier life that now, a decade later, are still sometimes very poignant for me, very present. And one of the things I think you do so remarkably well, Andy, is that you continue to explore how to thrive, how to connect with an ecstatic state of being, joy, ecstasy, exuberance, without saying that stuff didn't happen or I can't focus on it, that you're able to carry forward these men that you've loved, the difficulties you faced, the challenges that still affect you to this day, physically, emotionally, and at the same time, passionately love other men, passionately embrace living a full life and traveling and exploring events and photographing beautiful men and having a beautifully rich life. And it's been such a privilege to watch you more and more just step into this life and look around and say, yes, these really challenging things that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy happened to me and changed me. And I'm allowing them to be present to me at the same time, learning to acknowledge that in this moment, I'm actually really good. In this moment, there is so much to be grateful for. In this moment, there is so much love to be had. And that is a beautiful thing to get to witness.
While you were talking, I was thinking about two things. The first is, I think we can move forward with grief when we find a way to make sense of it. And for me, finding a way to make sense of it was to carry on the legacy of my partner. Before he and I met, I work as a professor. I'm in the classroom. I work in a very specialized professional field. Students bump their heads on the material that we work with. It's very difficult for them sometimes. And so we're there to catch them and support them as they encounter this difficulty. And I realized that my job was actually to love people in the face of adversity. And when I realized that, I really liked it. I thought, this is who I want to be. And it was very easy for me to do that in the classroom because I have a title, I have this role, it's very well defined. And I thought, I want to be that person outside the classroom too. I met Daddy Bear, and he was that person. He went through life interacting with everybody that he encountered from a spirit of kindness and from a place of love. It was fantastic to be with him because it was like taking this master class in human kindness. And I got to see him interact and in time kind of step up beside him and be part of a team that was, whether we were talking to the server that was bringing out our breakfast or the guy who was training on the machine beside us at the gym or a friend that we saw at a circuit party or anyone else, to be engaging with them in a friendly, kind-hearted, dare I say, loving way. When he died, I was devastated and I didn't know who I was. It took me a long time to figure out what and who I could be without him. And I latched onto this notion of, okay, he gave me the name Papa Bear. I'm going to stick to it. And I'm going to try and continue to do what I did with him. And that is to go forward into the world and to the extent that I'm able, make it a kinder place. The other thing that I was thinking about while you were talking was, and this has been a relatively recent understanding, is that, yeah, I am okay. I still hurt. I still experience pain. I still experience grief. But by the same token, those little pinpricks of light, they're gratitude. That's what that is. And I began a practice every day of stopping and thinking, okay, what are the things that I have to be grateful for? And the ones that I really latched on to were people. there were still the boys from our circle around us. And so every morning I got up and I thought, what can I do? I'll write something loving and kind to each one of them this morning. There have been some tragedies. As I mentioned, one of the boys committed suicide. Another one got involved with crystal meth and is just not the same person anymore. But new people came in. Throughout the experience, there's always been this sort of roster of men around me who want to engage with me in a loving way. And I begin every day, including today, by getting up and saying, what can I say to each one of these men that is encouraging?
You bring so much love to all the men who know you, all the people who know you. And I get to hear wonderful stories about even just the students that you work with and how seen and supported and helped they feel by you and your approach to working with people. One of the things I have witnessed you explore more and more, even in your teaching work, is this idea of letting go of needing to correct difficult things and instead embracing play and just giving unconditional love. I hear you talk a lot about letting go of needing to fix situations and instead just being a sun that just shines and just your job is just to give light. You want to talk a little bit about that journey of unlocking the tightness and just opening up?
It was funny because from July of 23 to January 1st of 24, I was on a sabbatical. Among other things, I trained as a life coach. And I also had, because I was not teaching and not doing my regular work at the university, I had a moment to step back and say, how do I want to come back? Do I want to come back to teaching differently? And I looked at my old course outline, my syllabi, and they said something like, I, the teacher, will give you, the students, recreate real world experiences to see if you're up to the level required in our field, and all this very elitist, exclusionary talk. And now, after rethinking everything, my course outline says something like, I, the teacher, will try to create a safe environment in which you feel free to play. So come play with me. The field I work in has to do with language, and we're all language nerds. We're all there because we're very geeky about languages and the way that they work. And let's just be geeks together and have fun.
Do you feel like that letting go of structure and embracing play and just embracing this idea of luminosity, that you're just there to shine and support, has it transitioned over also to your personal relationship?
Absolutely. I have to credit you with the metaphor about being a son, because that came from you. And when it did, it was a kind of a wake-up moment for me. I was finding that there was this kind of revolving door of men coming into my personal life who would say things like, I really like you, you're communicative, you're very loving, you're very kind, and I have to run away now because these things remind me of abuse and manipulation. And it was a very frustrating time, and I was questioning myself and saying, gosh, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I don't put myself out there quite that much. Maybe, am I too much? Do I need to take my foot off the gas pedal? Am I overwhelming these people? Am I extra in the way that I'm doing this? And you basically said to me, no, you're a sun, shine. That's your job. And there are some planets in orbit around the sun that are on an elliptical orbit. And there'll be moments when they come closer to you, and there'll be moments when they go further away from you. It doesn't matter, just shine. And so I've held on to that, and it really got me through a few dark moments.
Remember when we first met, or shortly thereafter, one of the things I identified was the strong feeling that part of your purpose and your mission in this life is to help others heal and grow and move through their journey with greater finesse. And we early on identified how part of these really difficult experiences, losing your partner, losing your son, while tragic, also were providing you with the empathy and the understanding to be able to be a more facile guide for others. And post you going through that life training program, you've come to identify as being a grief coach. You've started your YouTube channel, which explores life after life. How do we move on after these difficult events? Will you just talk a little bit more about that?
That came so slowly and really didn't come into focus until relatively recently. In March of 23, I got asked by Jason Collins, aka Masculine Jason, to do an interview with him. And the series is called Redemption. So we wanted to talk to people whose lives had really gone south and who had managed to pull themselves back up again. And I thought I might fit that bill. And it really wasn't until after the interview came out and I watched it myself that I thought, ooh, that's a story. And I had people come to me and say, that's really powerful. what happened to you and the way you tell the story and the things you learned from it. And it wasn't really until after that point when things began to crystallize for me. And I thought, as horrible as the experiences were, and I wouldn't wish them on anybody and I wouldn't want to go through them again, I'd be lying if I said I didn't benefit from them, in the sense that they forced me to rethink how I behaved and how I handled and how I processed certain things. They forced me to be more compassionate, more kind to other people, to be more resilient, to face insecurities. There was a point last summer when I looked at myself in the mirror and said, hey, you're not the same person you were when Daddy Bear died. You're quite a different person. And I realized I liked that version of myself. And in September of 23 was when I started the life coach training program. I initially went in because I wanted to take what I learned and apply it to my teaching. But shortly after I got there, I realized I was going to get some tools that were going to help me in my own grief. And as part of the program, we had to then build hours of coaching. And I put the word out into my social networks that I was doing this thing. And boom, found myself with a good clientele of at least 15 people who wanted to see me on a somewhat regular, if not weekly basis. And it was then that I realized, hey, I have something here that is good for other people too. And so I still, on the side, work as a life coach. And my clients are primarily people who, like me, have lost someone close to them. And one of my clients jokingly one day said, you're not a life coach. And I said, what am I? And he said, you're an afterlife coach. And tickled my funny bone and made me think, yes, that fits for a couple of different reasons, not the least of which is that, yeah, we're trying to figure out what is life after this big dark shadow of an event, and how do we move forward? How do we find new life? And that was why I started the YouTube channel. I just wanted something to complement my work and was interested in exploring people's stories where they too had faced some trauma, some adversity, and had managed to stand back up again. And I find these stories really engaging, really inspiring. And I've spoken to some people who have done some ordinary, but at the same time extraordinary.
One of the things I so admire about you, that I think is extraordinary about you, is how you are unapologetically you in any space you walk into. And I love the myriad of spaces that you are able to exist in. We have academia on one side, which can be very conservative. We have working with men around very intimate, tender things. We have you in kink culture. We see you in club culture. And some people would think all of those things are contradictions. You can't exist openly, equally in all of them. And even how you physically show up in this space. You are in some ways a physically intimidating guy. You're a larger build, you're tatted up, nose ring. And yet people who know you also know that you are so sweet and so kind and so loving.
I didn't always look like this. Getting in shape and the tattoos and all of that is a somewhat recent decision. When I met Daddy Bear, one of the things that I was immediately drawn to was that he was so different, that he was so much his authentic self. He was 5'5", 230 pounds, muscular man, beard down to his navel, nose ring too. He had what I called the interrupted mohawk. He wanted to have a mohawk, but this big bald patch up the crown of his head. So he had like a piece here and a piece here. Never wore pants, only wore kilts because he was a nudist, and that was the next best thing to be nude. Plus, when you're 5'5" and 230 pounds, finding pants that fit is not an easy thing. And so when he walked down the street, people turned their heads. The other day I was in the grocery store and I was standing in the checkout line, and it's warm, so I was in a tank top and my tattoos were visible. And I could see a woman, probably about 10 years older than me, staring at me. She's very middle of the road, a white woman. And so I thought, oh, here we go. She's thinking negative thoughts about me. It's going to be judgmental or whatever. She walked over to me and I was like, great, this is it. And she looked at me and in a sprightly and cheerful voice said, who is your tattoo artist? And what I have come to understand is that difference is an open door. People out there, especially in big cities, are craving connection. They want to be able to talk to other people. And because I have tattoos and a beard and a ring in my nose and I'm in a certain shape, I get young guys walking up to me going, dude, how much you bench? Which makes me laugh. I was out with friends recently at a restaurant, and the waitress asked us if we were boxers. And another time I was with another man who's in my circle of love. We were on a cruise, and about 10 times over the course of the week, we got asked if we were WWE wrestlers. And what I think that is, as cute as those stories are, is people just want connection because there's something about you that is different. They feel empowered to go up and ask you about it. I was in the airport this past week and I had a little slug of water in the water bottle. And so I tipped it back before I went through TSA. And the guy behind me said to me, "Got to get that last bit of protein in, eh, bro?" Which again made me laugh. I don't think of myself quite that way. But again, here's a stranger who just wanted an in. Someone wanted to laugh. It's boring. It's nerve wracking to stand there. Isn't it so much better if we can share a laugh and a smile with a stranger?
Talk about connection and talk about love. You, sir, are a man with a lot of beautiful men who love you. You want to talk a little bit about that experience of being polyamorous and having all these planets of men who just think you're the bee's knees?
I'm not sure they'd all agree.
So grateful.
I'm not sure they'd all agree with that assessment.
Maybe just the bee's elbows then.
I have never had a monogamous relationship. All of my relationships have been open. Starting with Daddy Bear, my relationships have all been polyamorous. So it was the two of us with a bunch of boys.
And for those who aren't in the know, could you just explain what that means to them and what pup?
Yeah, so boys, pups, and it can mean slightly different things depending on where you are and what we're talking about. In the BDSM world, there is an implication that there is a dominant, submissive note to this, although that was not the case in any of our connections. Instead, they were younger men for whom we were father figures and who were in touch with us on a regular basis, so in some cases daily, who would come and stay with us when there was a big holiday on. Daddy Bear lived in San Francisco. So when there was Pride or Dory Alley or the Folsom Street Fair, these big LGBT festivals that happen in San Francisco, it's a little bit like gay Christmas. Everybody comes to town and there's a lot going on, and so we'd have a house full of boys and pups who would stay with us, hang out with us. And in some cases, our relationships with them were sexual. In some cases, they were more platonic. It depended on the person.
And in case anybody's watching who's not familiar with this culture, when he says young men and boys, he does mean legal age. Throw that out.
Yes, they were all
throwing that out there.
By young, 10, 15, 20 years younger than me. It's all perfectly legal. We have their ID to prove it. And so after Daddy Bear passed and after Puppy Pouncer, my son, committed suicide, I found myself at some point after that in a relationship with two men separately. It was not a three-way thing. And the one man was in a relationship with another man. So he was in a polycule of his own. And what can I tell you about that? It's not for everyone. If a relationship with one person is complicated, then a relationship with more than one is more complicated, takes more communication, takes more talking through, takes more setting aside insecurities and working on them. But ultimately, the rewards are huge. I have not one person who loves me. I have a circle of men. Just to give people an idea, there are 3 men with whom I have a very deep connection at the moment. And there's a circle of maybe 5 more that are in that boy category that don't see me as a primary partner, don't see me as their boyfriend, see me as their daddy. And yet with them, I have loving, caring, family-like relationships.
So many of us in the LGBTQ world were not accepted by our families, or the relationships are very complicated. And I think we see in different aspects of queer world, we see this idea of creating chosen families. And you see that in ball culture, for example, like having the house mother and the children of the house of Balenciaga, the house of Prada, whatever house you belong to. And so we see this also in other aspects of gay culture, like the one that you're describing, of how do we create chosen families that give us emotional and mental support, that give us love, that give us a place to call home, that give us intimacy, because all of us as human beings require that. And I think you provide such a beautiful example of how do we live, how do we get our needs met? And it may not look like we thought it would when we were 12 years old growing up in rural Missouri thinking, I'm going to marry a woman, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to have a job for the next 50 years, we're going to have 2.5 children. But instead to say, we have to work with the tools we're given, the lives we're given, with the bodies we're given, with the orientations or the gender identities we're given. and create meaning, create purpose, and create joy. And I think you demonstrate that so well. And I think you also provide a beautiful lamppost for those in the queer community who are dealing with loved ones dealing with addiction, loved ones who are considering suicidal ideations, people who are dealing with some of the more harsher facts of queer life, because there is so much trauma in our community. And I love the space that you create for people to have hope, to have this sense of what is possible, and to say there is no one right way to live. There's no one right way to go about creating a joyful life. So thank you for being that example for so many men.
Thank you for saying that. Anne Williams, in her book, The Course in Miracles, there's a point where she says that at every moment we have a choice between two things. The first is we can act out of fear, or we can act out of unconditional love. And I'll give you, for instance, one of the men in my life is a porn star. And when we were first getting to know each other, it was on our very first visit, we were having some difficulties. Things were rocky between us. There was not a lot of sex at that point because of the difficulties. And he said to me, we're going out tonight, and it's a launch party for a friend of mine who has created his own sort of porn website. And he asked me to perform, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm not going to be part of this sex performance that they're putting on. I'm going to hold this guy's flogger, and maybe that's it. About 5 minutes before the start, he comes to me, he goes, no, as it turns out, actually, I am performing. And I was, oh, I have to stand here in front of a crowd of people and watch you have sex, knowing that we're not doing that in our relationship. Yeah. It was painful. And what's more, he said, here's my camera, film me, please, while I'm doing this. So I was like, oh, I can't even walk away and turn a blind eye or anything. I had to be there front and center filming. And to get back to the Marianne Williams business, I was like, okay, you know what? I want to run away. And the first man who came up and tried to top him, I had this crazy urge to rush in and stop him, go, no, you don't, which I knew would have been absolutely disastrous, right? So I was like, okay, you know what? That falls in the fear category. How do you get back to unconditional love? And the unconditional love is the whole night at the party before the sex show started, he had his hands all over me. He danced with me. He never left my side. And when the performance was over and the lights were off and the camera stopped, the very first thing he did was he spun on his heel, made a beeline for me, and planted a kiss on my lips. I said, "How? Let go. Let go of the anger. Let go of the hurt. That's coming from another place. That's not coming from here, and it's not coming from right now. Let it go. This man is giving you, both before and after, every sign, every symbol he knows that you are special. Take that. Accept it."
You are a remarkable man, Papa Bear Clifford. And I also want to thank you for the wisdom you've brought into my life. We often talk about this idea of guiding another person or helping another person is never just a one-way relationship, that we are changed through the experience, that we grow through the experience of helping others. There's also that idea of we teach what we need to learn. The joy and the healing I've received from watching you go on your own journey and watching you explore and evolve and heal and grow has been tremendous. And I think it also just provides such a beautiful example too of this idea that when we do our own work to heal, we end up helping others heal on their journey. And it's something I hear as well for you with these men in your life. Hearing stories about how you've continued to work on yourself has inspired them, or how you working through your own tensions has created an environment where they've been able to heal and see new perspectives. How beautiful that is. So I just, for myself and for all these men that you're inspiring, thank you.
One of the things about working with you is that we talk about me, but we also talk about you. And I find that particularly helpful because it has this really reassuring effect. It was interesting. When I was doing my training as a life coach, one of the model that we're taught to use, one of the things is don't share your experience colors, what the client is going to say. It leads them, it changes them. They'll say things to please you, that kind of thing. So don't do it. And I argued sometimes with the teacher. I'm like, well, don't we want the client to know that, hey, I've come from a similar place and I've had a similar experience and you're normal. And I thought in the LGBTQ world, that is the thing, perhaps above all other things that we need to hear, that we are normal, that there are people like us, there are people who understand us, there are people who get us, and we are okay the way we are. And so that is one of the messages that I get from working with you, Because I'll have some story about this happened and I'm facing this problem. And you'll chime in with, I know it's happened to me too. And I think, okay, I'm not weird. I'm not strange. I'm not different for facing this. There's somebody else just like me, and we're walking through this together.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why, for my own journey, I didn't pursue a more traditional therapeutic model. My husband has his graduate degree in clinical psychology. When we first talked about me starting to more actively move into this kind of work, it was one of the questions I really considered is, should I go a more traditional route? And part of the answer is no for me, because I clearly have my own lens that I approach things through, which is predominantly, I spent 7 years living in an ashram. I got very involved in the yogic philosophy of things. And so that's my lens that I work through in my spirituality, predominantly, many other things added in. But one of the big things that I've really come to embrace is that it's not about a relationship between the wounded and the healed. It is a relationship of love. Something me and my husband talk about too is, can you really do healing work if you don't actually love the person? And from my point of view, no. That when you are in a relationship of love, there is an element of mutuality. There is an aspect of giving and receiving and sharing, and to be fully impersonal and just let this be entirely your experience. I'm not going to share any of my journey, any of my struggles, any of my breakthroughs. This is just you independently. That is a valid modality for some, but it was not one that I personally felt called to explore in my work as a guide and healer for others. Because I really do believe that real change happens when you get to that space where you come together. There is love exchange and you are willing to share.
I had two thoughts where you were talking. The first is, now that I work with clients who are also grieving, there are things about the process, about my story, that I'd completely forgotten. I can name at least 5 of my clients whose partners have passed. And one of the big difficult things that they face in the LGBTQ community is gossip. I heard that so and so died because he's a drug addict, or he was shooting crystal meth, or he was a prostitute, or all kinds of vile things. And I had almost forgotten, but that happened to me as well. That, oh, I heard your partner injected steroids and he had a heart attack, or the meth thing got thrown at us too a couple of times. And I'd forgotten, I'd locked that away and forgotten about it. And talking to these clients, it came back for me and went, I think I need to deal with this myself too, as well as hearing their stories. The other thought I had was, you said, oh, you've got these many men who adore you. And I was laughing because some of those relationships have been extremely, as you well know, have been extremely challenging. They've not been easy. They've been fraught with difficulty. I come to my relationships, obviously, a trauma. Some of them do too, and it doesn't always mix very well. But I don't regret a moment of it, because even the difficult times force me to look at myself in the mirror and go, ooh, that's a part of me I don't really like very much. I probably need to work on that. And it gave me that opportunity, and it is still giving me that opportunity to do that.
Me and my husband have an incredibly loving, supportive relationship. And at the same time, there have been huge difficulties over the course of our 9+ years together. But we recognize that those difficulties are always about our own shit. And it's always it's revealing our own area for growth. And that when we work through those things together, it makes us better men individually and better partners for each other. And so to recognize that those difficulties are not the obstacle, they're the way. And it's heartening to watch you on that journey with your partners and say, yeah, you might have started off in a really rocky place, but as you've continued to work through that, you've come to such a place of love and respect and flow with these guys. And not to say that there aren't challenges, but you've seriously leveled up in many ways.
At an early point after my partner's passing, my family dropped out of the picture. We'd not had a close relationship at any point in my life. And I think the death was just too weird and too intimate for them to deal with. And they absconded, which was fine. They didn't cause any further trauma. Except that I have a brother who, about 6 months after my partner passed, called me up and decided that he didn't think very much of me and he needed to tell me this. And so started threatening me and calling me all sorts of names and whatnot. And I hung up the phone. And it really bothered me. And I was working with another life coach at the time, and I spoke to her about it. And I was commenting on the fact that he'd been like that throughout my whole life. And I was really angry and really resentful that I'd had that whole experience growing up, and it culminated into that phone call. And she said to me, I think you should be grateful. And that was like a slap in the face. I was like, what the hell do you mean I should be grateful? And she says, think about it. You grew up with this bully, this meanie, who threatened you and who inflicted all of this verbal and physical violence on you. And you reacted by choosing a life that's guided by kindness and love. She said you wouldn't have done that unless you had faced the obstacle of your relationship with your brother, among other things. And I sputtered, but eventually I realized that she was right. The obstacle was the way.
I don't begrudge the terrible things that have happened to me because I've been reading some fantasy books, so this is where this metaphor is coming from. Suffering, pain, difficult situations can do two things. It can break you or it can crack you open. And when you can see that those difficulties actually created the space for you to experience more joy, more compassion, more love, those things that caused you pain can bring you a tremendous amount of gratitude.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be seeking out additional suffering.
No, it's not like we're like, somebody come, please.
You know, unless you're into that. Unless that works for you.
That's
yeah. Exactly. But it's interesting. One of the men in my life is really coming to terms with the fact that he had some very severe trauma when he was young. And it's having a big impact on his relationships today. And he is, after a failed relationship, taking a hard look at himself in the mirror and going, damn it, not again. And feeling very resentful towards his family, saying, if you hadn't messed me up when I was young, I wouldn't be going through this right now. And my heart went out to him because Lord knows there was a time that I felt the same way. My relationships were failing and I couldn't help but notice a parallel in the way that they were failing between my love relationships and things that were going on in my family. But honestly, I'm not there anymore. In large part because I look at those experiences and they weren't fun. I don't want to repeat them. But they got me where I am today. I'm who I am because of them. There's a meme I saw the other day that said if we went back in time and fixed all the things that went wrong in our lives, we'd erase ourselves in the process.
Best men I've known, present company very much included, have known suffering, have known grief, have known immense challenges, and learned to thrive, not in spite of, but because of them. And some of the people I've met that I probably don't want to form close relationships with because of who they are. Sometimes those people have had very easy lives. They haven't known difficulties. And subsequently, they haven't experienced the capacity for real joy, that they haven't developed a strength of character. And actually, brain science is showing now that your ability to experience real lasting joy is predicated by having suffered. That you have to have known one to truly experience the other. So I want to surround myself with those people who have known sorrow, who have known hardship, and have learned to thrive through that experience, because I think those are the best people.
A question that got lobbed at me relatively recently, and a number of the men in my life are Black. And a question that got lobbed at me was, oh, you have a thing for Black men. Oh, here we go. People think I'm fetishizing. And I stopped for a minute. The answer I quit back was, no, I have a thing for men, period. But as I thought about it, I thought, well, what? It's true. You look at who's who, many of the men are Black. Why is that? And I think it's because most of my life, have been othered. I've been on the outside, lived in different countries, learned different languages, lived on different continents, and both fit in and never fit in at the same time. And the Black experience, especially in the United States, is exactly that. You have to fit in and yet not fit in at the same time. You are part of the fabric and yet othered. And so that makes sense to me. I'm not saying I know firsthand what it's like to experience racism, but I can understand some of the implications of it. And those men also understand me as a consequence. Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it?
I relate to that. When I was single and dating and looking for a partner, I dated men of across the rainbow. But I particularly was interested in people who were not from the same experience I had as a suburban, Midwestern, Christian, white boy. I wanted to be around people who not only had different life experiences than me that I could learn from, but I also wanted to be with people who knew what it was like to be otherized. As somebody who was relentlessly bullied and tormented growing up, I wanted people who knew what it was like to feel unwelcomed into spaces. I don't know if I could ever be partnered with the golden boy, the one who was blonde and blue-eyed, grew up with everybody loving him and captained the football team, and coming out wasn't a big deal. I can't relate to that.
And I think the corollary to that is, at least in my experience, those people who have been othered, who have had to find their way in, who've had to find a way to cope with that, also have a kind of kindness. At one point, I was dating a man and we were having some difficulty. So we saw a counselor. And one of his complaints was, I don't understand Andy because he always praises me. I never know when to take him seriously because all he ever does is say good things to me. And my response, I got quite angry. And I said, damn it, stop for a second and think about what I've been through. The loss, the loneliness, the pain. And yes, if you are in my life and you do something that I like or that resonates with me, damn it, I'm going to celebrate you. I'm going to say something good to you. I'm going to milk what you've done and who you are for every last little drop of joy that I can get out of it. I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't have that ability.
Your humanity is beautiful. I love how you share yourself so authentically, my friend. I want to thank you so much for taking time to share a little bit about you and your journey with us today. Folks, if you're interested in working with him as a life coach or a grief coach, I'm going to drop his links in the socials below. So please reach out to him. If you are a fitness enthusiast and would like to be photographed by him, I'm sure he...
Or even doesn't have to be a fitness enthusiast. Some of the men I photograph are in nice shape, but some are in different shapes, and that's all good too.
And if you just want to be his friend, I am sure he would love to hear that as well, because he is one of the sweetest, empathic men I know and takes such good care of all the men in his periphery. Give him some follows, give him some connection, and give him some love because he is so deserving.
Well, thanks for having me tonight, Kaylin, and I want to thank all of your viewers too. My hope is that in our conversation tonight, there may have been one or two things that have resonated with people that they found helpful. And if that's the case, I'll be very pleased.
Beautiful, sir. Thank you so much for your time, heart, and spirit. Thank you all for taking time to engage with us and listen to Papa Bear's beautiful stories. May you all be blessed. May you all be well. Thank you all.